Today it's tusks and teeth. Welcome to another episode of Thrive or Eaten Alive. Today we will finally be taking our team of 10 Cenozoic megamammals and determining their odds of survival in the Cretaceous period, specifically the Hell Creek Formation. They'll be judged on their ability to obtain food, overcome environmental obstacles, deal with native competition, and survive predation. Each species will have 1,000 breeding adults, and they'll be ranked from 1 to 10 on the Thrive or Eaten Alive scale. A 1 means they'd be swiftly driven to extinction without a chance to create the next generation. A 5 means they'd maintain a stable population but only have a small overall impact on the ecosystem. And a 10 means they'd completely dominate their niche, easily outmuscling all native competitors. If you haven't watched the Triassic or Jurassic episodes yet, go check those out first. I'll wait. First, we'll need to discuss what Hell Creek was like. While dominated by angiosperms, which would provide strange new fruits for our furry friends, the ecosystem is also rich with the classic cycads, ferns, and ginkgos, forming quite the spread for herbivorous visitors. Small mammals like Didelphodon and Cymolestes roam the tropical forests and floodplains of Hell Creek, feeding on eggs, insects, and small reptiles like lizards and boas. Ancient birds, including the diving bird Brodavis and the waterfowl Styginetta, added feathery diversity to the area. Brachycampsa, a heavily armored alligatorid over 2 meters long, prowled the waterways. Traces of adventurous sharks and even mosasaur remains have been found, indicating at least some interchange between the freshwater river systems and the western interior seaway. And what would Hell Creek be without its charismatic non-avian dinosaur fauna? Armored mega-herbivores like Triceratops, Torosaurus, and Ankylosaurus fill the niche of enormous low browsers, with the latter two being quite rare. Edmontosaurus, while unarmored, was a herd animal with a body mass average comparable to bull African elephants and a maximum size nearly triple that. Hell Creek sported a variety of small to medium dinosaurs as well, including the chicken parrot Anzu, the armored Denversaurus, swift Ornithomimus and Struthiomimus, dome-headed Pachycephalosaurus, and the small carnivores Pectinodon and Acaroraptor. Oh yeah, and the most formidable land predator known from the fossil record. With some of the sharpest senses in the animal kingdom, a bite that could explode bone, and a size range of 6 to nearly 12 tons, T-Rex is more than ready to welcome our team of megamammals with open jaws. To keep with tradition, the first mammal to make the drop is the South American giant cat, Smilodon populator. This heavily built ambush grappler peaked to over 400 kilograms and hunted caimans, ground sloths, camels, horses, toxodonts, and glyptodonts in its time, so it was clearly skilled at taking down a variety of prey items. I'm sure it also scavenged when it could, or bullied smaller predators away from their kills. The mixture of evergreen and deciduous forest would provide excellent terrain for ambushing potential meals. But what would it eat in this new hothouse world? The small ornithischians like Thescelosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, and Leptoceratops are in the perfect size range for an adult Smilodon, and I doubt it would have turned down an unsuspecting Brachycampsa given its taste for caimans. I can imagine a Smilodon mother teaching its curious cubs that juicy Leptoceratops young can be found in burrows, or showing them how to stalk by practicing on the small Didelphodon. The ornithomimids may be too fast most of the time, but could make a rare treat when sick or injured. This would of course put Smilodon in direct competition with the area's mesopredators. The Dromaeosaur Dakotaraptor, while not nearly as complete as once thought given its chimeric status, could be a threat to juveniles and would likely be going after the same prey. Pectinodon, while only known from teeth, may be an annoyance as well, but neither would put undue pressure on the much bulkier Smilodon. Juvenile rexes are another matter entirely. Bigger than Smilodon after only a few years of growing, likely faster, and extraordinarily agile for their size, they may see the cat less as competition and more as food. Smilodon earns a 6 on the Thrive or Eaten Alive scale. While far from the most formidable predator in the environment, it was powerful enough to succeed as an ambush predator in the heavily wooded areas while still being kept in check by juvenile Tyrannosaurus. Suitable food items are plentiful, so no problem there. The main factors holding it back from truly flourishing are the young Tyrannosaurs and the climate. Tobin 2014 used isotopic testing in bivalves to establish a Hell Creek summer temperature of 30 to 35 degrees Celsius, quite a bit warmer than the Pleistocene global average of 8 Celsius. Smilodon populator lived far away from the ice sheets, of course, and big cats like lion and tigers clearly handle warm temperatures without too much issue, but it would be an extreme shift from its temperate home. Hell Creek winters, which according to Aarons and Allen 2014 were around 3 Celsius, would be a welcome respite. Next up is Elasmotherium caucasicum, the monstrous 3 to 5 ton rhinoceros that hails from Pleistocene Eastern Europe. Recent studies indicate that its horn was smaller than previously believed, but was still a formidable weapon. Its teeth never stopped growing, forcing it to graze constantly on low brush and silica-rich grass to keep its teeth from outgrowing its mouth. That may be an issue since Hell Creek had no grass to speak of. Once Elasmotherium spawned in this hot, humid wetland forest, it would be forced to feed mainly on fallen palm fruits, ferns, and cycads, the latter of which may help with its tooth problem by being so rough. Selective pressure may cause the population to shrink over time to deal with the lack of grasses, but their size would be helpful in disputes over territory with ankylosaurids and ceratopsians in the area. How do they stack up against the competition? The nodosaur Denversaurus is comparable in mass to a smaller Elasmotherium at 3 tons, and would likely be eating much of the same low-growing vegetation. They had a much faster reproduction rate than big mammals, so they could take away crucial resources when the rhino was trying to raise its young. Ankylosaurus was larger at 3 to around 5 tons, and was so heavily armored that it would be difficult to push it around, not to mention running afoul of the club tail. Triceratops and Torosaurus were much bigger, nearly twice the size of the biggest Elasmotherium, and ate large quantities of the tough, low-growing plants that the rhino would be after. This niche is a competitive one, so Elasmotherium would struggle with so many other massive herbivores in the area eating the same plants. It does have its size and weaponry going for it though when it comes to self-defense. While the very young would need to be concerned about dromaeosaur raids, likely parental care should stave off the majority of attacks. Adults would only need to be concerned about curious Tyrannosaurus, and fortunately their build mimics the squat, deceptively agile frontal defense that works so well for Triceratops. While much smaller than their dinosaurian counterpart, and with less formidable horns, Elasmotherium is far more equipped to deal with Hell Creek predators than the majority of mega herbivores throughout prehistory. That being said, the size difference between even the biggest Elasmotherium and an average T-Rex is considerable, and the steppe native rhino would not be used to navigating dense woodlands or alluvial plains. It's likely that T-Rex would be pleasantly surprised with the sudden influx of Triceratops-like animals that were easier to kill. Although in absolute terms the rhino was no pushover. It would likely be more preferred prey than the big ceratopsians, but more work than Edmontosaurus. The climate would be brutal for the rhino. Pleistocene Eastern Europe and Russia was freezing, and the moderate to hot Hell Creek would be a difficult change. Overall, Elasmotherium scores a 4. Just short of establishing a stable population. Predation pressure, while not existential, would be harsh, along with heavy competition from bigger and stronger herbivores for food that it's not accustomed to, in an environment far hotter than the cold steppe it called home. Onto Megatherium americanum, the giant ground sloth. This 4-ton heavyset browser used its claws to pull leaves and fruit from branches, and possibly supplemented its diet with some protein from carrion, although that's uncertain. It ate a little bit of everything in terms of plants, including grass and herbs, so its generalist diet means it will have a better time with the menu than Elasmotherium did. Being able to leverage its height and claws to forage in multiple areas instead of being restricted to the ground will also make a big difference, and heavily reduce the impact of low browsing competition from ankylosaurids and ceratopsians. Perhaps it would become a fruit specialist and eventually shrink and become arboreal if it survived long enough. The predators would be a problem. Sloths have extremely long gestation periods and vulnerable young, and Megatherium did not live with any predators even a quarter of its size. While its claws were certainly formidable, they may not be effective against a Tyrannosaur twice its weight used to maneuvering around Triceratops horns. Its thick skin and possible furry covering may have thwarted a saber-toothed cat, but T-Rex's skull alone was nearly the size of Megatherium's torso. A sloth this big is a dream come true for a 10-ton megatheropod. Fortunately, Megatherium's potential hairlessness may have reduced the impact of the hot summers, and its large body size would allow it to weather the near-freezing winters. Burrowing behavior may be useful for insulation in seasonal extremes, as well as protecting themselves and their young from hungry theropods. So, while more vulnerable than the previous two in some ways, it has unique adaptations that could be helpful, and overall earns a 5. Livyatan melvillei, of course, will not be dropped into the terrestrial habitat its companions are forced to confront. Instead, Livyatan enters the contest as an inhabitant of the western interior seaway. We don't have a ton of Maastrichtian data on this area, so I'll pull from a little earlier in the Cretaceous for the video. Not to spoil too much, but Livyatan is gonna clean house. It would giggle at the big sharks like Cratoxyrhina and bulldog-faced fish Zephactinus. The Duraphagus tychodus, a 10-meter-long shell eater, would find itself crushed to bits in the giant whale's jaws. Elasmosaurus is the Cretaceous equivalent of top ramen to this monster from the future, and no mosasaurs known from the fossil record grew to more than a fifth of Livyatan's mass. The Cretaceous simply had no equivalent to a 50-plus ton raptorial beast that was adapted to warm water and could quite easily one-shot the local apex predators. If anything, as Livyatan grew accustomed to the area, it may shrink, given the lack of animals the size of the baleen whales it usually dined upon, developing into a large-toothed, orca-like superpredator. It basically has no disadvantages in this scenario, taking home a perfect 10. Perucetus colossus drops into the same habitat but fills a very different niche. Considerably larger than Livyatan at 70 to 90 tons, its thick body and stay-puffed marshmallow bones leave room for plenty of uncertainty when deliberating about its ecology. The current understanding, without the skull excavated of course, is that it would have been a shallow water feeder, eating crustaceans and mollusks. Just as in the Jurassic Ocean, there wasn't really anything around to stop Perucetus from living the good life in the warm shallows. No predators big enough to eat it exist, and there are plenty of the aforementioned crustaceans and mollusks to go around. It would compete with the more nimble Tychodus, but that's really the only issue here. Perucetus, for the first time in this series, earns a 9. Arctodus simus is a newcomer to the show. This ancient omnivorous bear was genuinely enormous for a carnivoran, with the very largest individuals approaching a full metric ton. Compare that to modern grizzlies, whose biggest modern examples are just over half that mass. Arctodus simus had chewing adaptations to process large amounts of plant matter in proportionally short hind limbs and back, which has been suggested to increase energy efficiency on long walks when searching for food. A 2003 biomechanical analysis indicated that it would have been able to run at nearly 30 miles per hour, which in 2022 was theorized to be an adaptation for crossing vast amounts of territory at a time. It ate whatever it wanted and needed, whether that be meat, fruit, or other plant material, and that adaptability will be huge in the late Cretaceous paleo environment. A 2021 study demonstrated that giant short-faced bears, which is a bit of a misnomer, had low population densities, so as soon as the group of 1,000 appeared in Hell Creek, they'd want to spread out and find their own places. As discussed, finding food will not be an issue. There's plenty of vegetation and small animals to go around, and as generalists, they don't have to worry about competing with one specific type of creature. They're good at everything and thrive in a variety of environments. They've been found all the way from Alaska to Mexico. If the environment, food, and competition aren't problems, then how much of a threat would Tyrannosaurus pose? To put things into perspective, here's the Blue Rhino Studios Arctodus simus on its hind legs compared to a bunch of humans. Here's the same Arctodus, 11 feet tall, next to Sue. One bite and you now have half a bear. But that's assuming the two are facing off in some sort of contrived death battle, which is entirely unrealistic. Adult Tyrannosaurus likely wouldn't even be interested in Arctodus. They're too small and fast to be worth the meat, and even if a T-Rex could clearly demolish the bear, getting hit by those claws in the face wouldn't be fun for anybody. Why go to the trouble? Even the subadults, which are at least as fast as Arctodus and still considerably more powerful, have easier prey in juvenile Edmontosaurus and Pachycephalosaurus. If they do develop a taste for bear meat, then Arctodus's low genetic diversity could cause some interbreeding issues as their population plummets, but it doesn't seem probable. I award them a very solid 8. They can eat whatever, live wherever, and aren't likely to run afoul of the local apex, but won't be able to bully their way around the environment like they used to. The next animal is a cultural icon, the Columbian mammoth. This elegant titan was also highly adaptable, dotting Pleistocene North America all the way from frigid Canada to balmy south-central Mexico. They're massive, too. Larramendi 2015 put the average adult at 9,500 kilograms, nearly twice the mass of an average bull African elephant, and comparable to the very largest Triceratops. Their tusks had an interesting arrangement, growing inwards rather than pointing out like spears. Perhaps they used them like shovels to dig up roots and other plants, which their broad ridged teeth would make short work of. A 2023 study showed that tooth wear patterns differed wildly, even within the same populations, so they clearly were not limited to any one type of vegetation as their main diet. Triceratops, Torosaurus, and Edmontosaurus would be the main competition. While the big ceratopsians appear to have chiefly lived solitary lifestyles as adults, they'd still be eating the same food and would be perfectly capable of standing their ground against an angry bull mammoth, and vice versa. Edmontosaurus, while far less physically intimidating, was an animal that traveled in herds of hundreds of individuals, and would thus be far more of a threat ecologically to the mammoths. Each hadrosaur would eat a tremendous amount of food and reproduce much more quickly than the big-eared newcomers, maintaining a wide range of influence. A big herd of hadrosaurids was an ecological tie, changing the landscape wherever they traveled, and a herd of mammoths was no different. Perhaps the mammoths would prefer to stay out of the woodlands and in the wetlands, or would migrate to find new resources that weren't already monopolized by armies of Edmontosaurus. Columbian mammoths typically formed herds of females and juveniles, with the bulls wandering off by themselves. That would be a very dangerous behavior in this world of arch predators. Larramendi's 2015 study put large Columbian mammoth males at 12.5 tons, which would make them 24 times heavier than the largest predator they shared their territory with, Smilodon. Suddenly, these big bulls find themselves in an environment where predators nearly their own size are not only present but common. A 2011 census revealed that a quarter of the large-bodied dinosaur taxa in Hell Creek was Tyrannosaurus. Typical fully grown individuals massed 8 tons or more, with the largest known individual, Cope, approaching 12. A recent study calculated that a big Rex could power walk at least 17 miles per hour or 27 kilometers per hour, considerably faster than any elephant it has been reliably recorded to run, and the smaller Rexes may have been able to enter a true run and push well past 20 miles per hour or 32 kilometers per hour. As pointed out by Madly Mesozoic in his excellent video on dromaeosaurs in the Ice Age, theropods had an avian-like unidirectional breathing system that allowed them to constantly be taking in oxygen. That means they could engage in pursuit predation unlike anything the mammoths had ever seen, besides perhaps humans. A 2018 study found that theropods were also uniquely suited to ambushing animals that were sensitive to low-frequency vibrations, which they were likely skilled at detecting themselves. The shape of their feet warped the seismic waves from their footprints, making it feel to the prey animal as if the theropod weren't getting any closer, when in fact they were preparing to strike. Add to that T-Rex's excellent binocular vision and eagle-like visual acuity, the probable ability to see in ultraviolet to track moving prey, and incredible smell and hearing, and you have a mammoth's worst nightmare. Not that a mammoth is a pushover by any stretch of the imagination. In the case of the big bulls, you're still dealing with a 12-plus ton animal. animal, and its own senses were likely quite keen. Modern elephants have very powerful senses of smell and hearing, so although the sonic camouflage may succeed in confusing their ears, their trunks would not be so easily fooled, making ambush difficult. The Columbian mammoth's tusks are not primarily adapted for combat, but more intimidation and foraging, making size and intelligence their biggest advantages. They can still use their tusks to ram or even pierce their tyrannosaur predators, but with how curved they are, they'd be far less useful defensive weapons than that of a trike or anky. Bulls, when living alone, would be far more vulnerable to tyrannosaur attacks, unused to defending themselves against carnivores in their weight class that were adapted to take on much more heavily armed and fortified prey. But group defense with the females and calves would be crucial in staying alive. Group tactics, of course, beget group tactics, and there is evidence for gregariousness in Tyrannosaurus rex. A nightmare of T-Rex may find it beneficial to follow herds of mammoths and pick off members when hungry, using their extraordinary eyesight to facilitate nighttime raids. Elephants can hold grudges, though, and have long memories, so perhaps matriarchs would lead attacks on Tyrannosaur nests. This strategy, however, would likely lead to confrontations with defensive tyrant mothers or fathers and result in more casualties for the herd. It's the prehistoric equivalent of a would-be robber breaking into a house full of Rottweilers. Pound for pound, proboscidans simply are not adapted for combat compared to theropods. I'd suggest that an elephant would need more than a 2-time size advantage to win more often than not against a megatheropod. Taking all of this into account, the Columbian mammoth is comparable to Megatherium with a respectable 5. The presence of gigantic, bone-crushing, possibly pack-hunting dragons and titanic herds of hadrosaurs would limit their success, but sticking together and using cultural memory to avoid especially dangerous areas would keep them alive and stable. On to Gigantopithecus blacki, an orangutan relative from China. About the size of a very large gorilla at 200 to 300 kilograms as of a 2017 estimate, it ate fruit and vegetation based on study of its enamel and plaque. A 2024 study found that its over-reliance on fruit and nutrient-poor foods like twigs and leaves contributed to its extinction 250,000 years ago, when the dense forests it relied upon thinned out. I'm gonna be honest, Gigantopithecus' chances do not look good. It relies on thick woodlands for its food sources, but that's where the chances of being ambushed by predators is highest. The quote-unquote Dakota raptor was large enough to take down adults of any ape. Even silverback gorillas today are predated upon by leopards smaller than themselves. Subadult Tyrannosaurus would have a heyday with a troop of Gigantopithecus, treating them like popcorn. This is a short section since the group of Gigantopithecus will be very short-lived. I'm giving them a 2. They simply don't have the generalist ability or physical adaptations to survive living in the same environment as theropods their own size or larger, and they're highly sensitive to changes in diet. I can see them dying out after the 2nd generation, being generous. When apes don't have the hyper-intelligence of humans, they don't tend to fare that well against large predators. Our penultimate team member, hailing from the Miocene of North America, is the Satan pig itself, Daeodon shoshonensis. Built like a cross between a boar, a bison, and the Grim Reaper, Daeodon maxed out at well over 800 kilograms and had the general diet of a grizzly bear, eating roots, nuts, meat, other plant material, pretty much whatever it wanted. It lived in floodplains and forests broadly similar to those of Hell Creek, giving it a passing familiarity with the Cretaceous landscape. Bite marks suggest that it chomped down on chalicotheres, so it really was the ultimate opportunistic feeder. Didelphodon is on the menu, Pachycephalosaurus is on the menu, Leptoceratops is on the menu, ornithomimus with sprained ankles are on the menu, Anzus on the menu, juveniles of just about anything are on the menu. Daeodon was so adaptable that competition wouldn't be much of a problem, at least in terms of diet. Generalists are the bane of extinctions. As beast mode as Daeodon is, though, it's still getting turned into a happy meal by the T-Rex teenagers running around. Tyrannosaurus young grew slowly until about 13, and then exploded, combining power with speed for several terrifying years until they settled into their monstrously bulky adult form. That being said, there's no shame in being predated upon by Tyrannosaurus, and Daeodon is so fit to thrive in almost any environment on almost any diet that it's barely a point against it. It still earns an 8. And the final megamammal in this series after almost a year of waiting for the last episode, Paraceratherium asiaticum. The titan rhino from Oligocene Eurasia was 8 to 10 tons on average and peaked at 17 tons. It was a high browser that lived in arid, temperate scrublands and ate soft leaves, of which there were plenty in Hell Creek. Competition-wise, it would be pretty free, given how the local mega-herbivores were chiefly low browsers, although Edmontosaurus may have eaten from higher foraging levels on occasion. The climate wouldn't pose a major problem either, given its relatively warm homeland. 2 factors bring it down. The first, extremely slow reproductive rate. The second, kid named T-Rex. Paraceratherium was far more poorly equipped to deal with large theropods than the Columbian mammoth was. Despite being larger, size was its only effective weapon. It wouldn't be able to land its powerful kicks effectively on a predator rivaling it in size and height, and as an adult, it had little to no experience with predation. Its neck is right within biting range for an adult rex, and even if that were an awkward angle for a one-shot kill, Tyrannosaurus' ability to thrash and crush after biting down mirrors a hydraulic press covered in railroad spikes thanks to its powerful neck muscles. Consider that the average Paraceratherium was just about as big as an average rex, which was accustomed to taking down herbivores with swords attached to their faces and sledgehammers to their tails, and you do not have yourself an even fight by any means. It's unlikely that they would be able to match replacement rate with such sudden and fierce predation pressure from animals that they have no defensive adaptations to deal with. They're relatively easy prey for a common predator, which is not a good combination. They limp off the playing field with a 2. Quick summary. In Hell Creek, going big doesn't seem to be better. In fact, it paints a target on your back. The animals that were most successful, other than Livyatan and Perucetus, which entered an ocean completely unprepared for them, were the medium-sized generalists, Arctodus and Daeodon. They slipped under Rex's radar and were able to eat enough types of food to adapt to the new diet without coming into direct energetic conflict with mega herbivores. Funnily enough, that's how Mesozoic mammals were able to succeed and thrive in a world dominated by reptilian megafauna. It's poetic that they continue to thrive in this series in the same way. And thank you to my channel members for your support. These Spec Eco videos take a lot of research, time, and effort to make, and I appreciate everyone who's watched them and everyone who's joined the channel. Funnily enough, the spin-off series, Megatheropods and the Cenozoic, seems to be more popular than this original trilogy, so I'll definitely keep making those as well. I also strongly recommend Madly Mesozoic's channel, although if you're watching this video, you've probably already seen all of his stuff. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see another collab, and if you haven't already, go watch our Spinosaurus on Pandora video. This Cretaceous episode has been nearly a year coming, and I'm thrilled to finally bring it to you. I'm the Vividan, and I'll see you next time.